Hi, this is Kevin with Hand Screen Printed. Just want to give you a quick tour of how I expose my screens. I've got a design here, maybe difficult to see. I've got 4 different transparencies, and it's going to be you can see this one, El Camino. This particular screen is going to be black. And we've got a yellow piece here. You can kind of see some of the halftones that are in there. This is going to be red, and we have like a light gray in here, so it's going to give you some pretty cool smoke features in there. So what I'm going to do is just expose one by one. Probably show you 1 or 2 of these. And let me know if you guys have any questions. So what I do is typically line up the screen on the glass, make sure it's nice and level and even. And I've got my yellow light in here because everything I do once this door is open will be light sensitive. So these are some of the screens I have that are coated and ready to go. Most of these are going to have like a mesh size, so it tells you how many silk screens or how many silk threads like per inch that there are. So this has 200, and these have 160. One thing to note about these is the higher the mesh screen is, the mesh count, the finer detail you're going to get in your final product here. So what I'm doing is just making sure this is aligned. And this is a homemade exposure unit. I've seen a lot of people use commercial units that cost, a couple $1,000s, but I think I was able to make this one for about 50 bucks or so. To include like all the lights, just use some scrap wood and stuff. So I put this little piece of foam on top, which will help wedge in the transparency to the screen face itself. And that place a piece of wood on top, which will help even out the balance of my 25-pound weight that's on top. So the weight is going to compress this foam onto the screen and the transparency in the glass, so there's no gap in between there. What I do here is I time my exposures. I'm gonna see if I can do this while I'm videotaping here, but let's see. So I'm looking for an 8-second exposure, so hang on. So you'll see the time's going. You can somewhat see the ultraviolet light that's in there. 8 seconds has passed and I've turned it off. So now we remove everything. There's some units that have like a vacuum seal on their exposure units, but this I think just uses compression. So once this is off, I'm gonna take my, let's see if you can, probably can't see anything on this screen right now. What I do is I typically spray it with a little bit of water. If I can get this, I'm trying to 3 hands here. As I quickly sprayed, you might be able to see some of the design coming through there. So I have to make sure that this gets a little bit of water on it, so if any other light comes in through my washout booth, this will stop actually exposing. So let me give another couple spritz of water real quick and then we'll go wash this out. And once I've got plenty of water on there, I turn on my light. So you can see my designs coming through now. You can see some of the halftone colors. It's actually upside down. So if we rotate, there you go. So if you can rotate now, you'll start to see a little bit more of my design coming through. You got some registration marks in that corner. typically make sure that this is rinsed out really well. Let it soak for a good minute or so before I even attempt to start actually pressure washing. And it looks like actually my registration mark over here is off. I think maybe when I was adjusting this screen, I probably moved the transparency a slight bit, but it shouldn't be an issue. You can actually start to see here, there's a little bit of emulsion that's rinsing out. And I'm not using a lot of pressure on this, it's just almost just like a little garden hose that it's just really washing out very simply. It doesn't take a lot of effort. If you are using a ton of pressure in order to expose your screens, then they're probably overexposed a little bit. So I put on my pressure washer head here. I just have a little electric, looks like it says 1700 PSI. So this will clear out the screen pretty easily. It does much better on the halftones. So let's see if I can kind of show you what this looks like here. Sometimes I'll have to do this a couple times just to make sure all the halftones are cleared out. But I typically just hold this up and I look through the screen. It actually seems like I'm missing a couple of halftone lines right here and the bottom in between those wheels. The rest of this looks pretty good. So I'm gonna try to give another spray right there in the middle and see if I can get that out. Let's take another look. And it may just be that these particular halftones are a little too thin for this screen, or overexposed just a tad bit, but it actually doesn't look too bad. Give it one quick spritz on the opposite side. Let's see if this helps get it cleared out. It seems like they're going through a lot better now. So I'm gonna let this sit for a second. And we'll do one final spray on the back side. And then it should be ready to dry and tape it up and print. Okay, so that's pretty good to me. So what we'll do is try to strain out the majority of this water to drip. I usually just let these sit out here and get a little bit of sunlight once I'm done with all of them. Them all to dry off. But for now, I will just set it right there. Actually, I'll set you over here. There we go. So it's going to sit there and dry off for a minute. I'll go ahead and expose one or two more screens while I got you on the video. So once I step back in here, this is now a light safe area. I can remove this transparency, and I'll go with this black one here so you can see my design a little bit better once it prints, or once it exposes. One trick that I'm doing here when I first started doing this is I would always print my transparencies in portrait mode, which would limit the width of this particular transparency is 13 inches. And this design, I think, is pushing about 15 inches wide. So if I print this in portrait mode, I wouldn't be able to get the width on here. So if I print it in landscape, it will fit on my silkscreen, and it makes the print a little bit larger. So it's just a matter of which way we're gonna go here. So I'm looking for another 200. This is gonna print all black, which I don't really want a ton of black overpowering my print. I find that 200 screen is ideal for my black ink. And I print all water-based inks, not plastisol. which gives a nice smoother texture to the garment itself. And let's see if I can scoot that over just a tad. You'll kind of see right here, it's getting really close to the edge of the actual coated part of the screen. So I'm going to slide that over so it's got equal coverage on both sides there. So, and you can kind of see, hopefully you can see, there's a little bit of play in between the screen and the transparency. You can probably hear that. And so that's where the foam comes into play, which will help compress that evenly as I expose. If there's any gap in between there, the light, even though I only exposed for about 8 seconds, the light itself is going to bounce all throughout there, and it's going to end up having like a much not as fine of a coverage. So, all right, let's see if I can do this again here. I got my weight on top. I'm going to go ahead and turn my lights on and start you up here. So I always do 8 seconds. That's typically good for me. Everyone's exposure unit's a little bit different depending upon the type of light that you're using, if it's LEDs or a halogen bulb, the distance between the lights and your screen, even from the type of emulsion, how long the emulsion's been sitting on the screen, what type of screen it is. I mean, even down to the type of ink that you're using on the transparency is going to have an impact on your exposure time. So what I typically recommend to people is to use a exposure calculator, which will then allow you to determine the appropriate amount of time to expose your screens. This is a little bit more tricky to do than with just the 2 hands here. So as I've sprayed, you can already somewhat see again, it's upside down, but you can see the design coming through there. And that's just the emulsion that's already starting to blend in with the water. And it makes the water a little bit more soluble. So when you, or not the water, the emulsion. So when you rinse it off with water, it'll have an easier time to rinse out. Let me turn that off. Give it a quick rinse down. Once you get it pretty much coated with water, it's not too much of an issue to have light exposed to it, because most of that emulsion is going to be already pretty wet. It's when it's still dry that any sort of light can have an impact then on getting your screens down. And I don't think this particular screen right here has any halftones. I think this is pretty much all straightforward blocked out print. There may be some small like lines through here. They're not too difficult. So I'm just attaching my pressure washer on here. Let that sit for a couple more seconds. What I recommend, I know a lot of people use pressure washers just immediately. When I first started out, I was really eager to rinse this screen off and get my print to look good. So I would definitely recommend just letting the chemicals do their thing. So the more time it takes for the water to blend in there with the emulsion, the easier it will be to then rinse off afterwards. So it's like a little bit of an art there to figure out your timeline of when to actually rinse. You don't necessarily just want to like wait forever for that water to start evaporating and drying, but you want to give it some time to actually work through. So let's go ahead and rinse this off here. Actually, turn this on. All right, so this one looks like it did fairly well. I've got a couple more spots, if you can see right in there, that probably need to be rinsed out. So I'll turn this around to give a quick spray from the other side here. But overall, it looks pretty good. I think once you see like the black, usually it shows you the image very well. But like the cool gray or the red or the yellow, sometimes it's really hard to see like what your artwork really looks like. So black is usually the most interesting one to clean out and watch it come to life. Let's do this again. All right, let's take a look. That looks a lot better. What I was looking at here is, let's see if I can really show you the lines in between there. You can see, but it's kind of difficult to see them. They're not really entirely separated, so they're looking fairly good. Might do a quick little rinse on this side. That should be good to go. Thing too is you really don't want to sit and power wash this thing for that long. What'll happen then is even though you've already, particularly I'm only exposing for about 8 seconds, but the emulsion that gets hit with the UV light has an opportunity to harden, but you really need to what they call post harden. So once the emulsion's rinsed off, right, so now you have your print here. And that looks a lot better to me. So once you have your print here and it's ready to go, I let it dry for a little bit and then I'll have it sit under another UV light. So that way over time you won't have an impact, especially if you're printing water-based inks, that the water part of your ink won't then start eating away at the emulsion. So I'm gonna go ahead and clean out the rest of my screens, and then I'll give you a quick tutorial on how I line these screens up and go ahead and ink one up. See you guys in a minute.